Okay, Tyler Bryden here. Hope everything's going well. I'm sitting back in my home in Port Credit, rearranging things for the baby. And now I gotta open up some closet space. And really, closet had been just for design in previous videos, but function over design and switched around in the room. So I gotta get some stuff behind me here. Maybe over the next videos, you'll see some progress on that. But I wanted to say hello and I want to say happy Toronto Tech Week. This is a super interesting event. It's the first time they've ever done it. I'm just outside of Toronto. I feel a lot of love and attachment to the city, and I moved here to become part of the Toronto tech community after originally living in London, Ontario, pitching the software, the technology I was working on, getting a lot of glazy eyes, and then being able to go to Toronto and talk about that technology at high speeds with great understanding and grasp of what I was looking at, what I was thinking about, and that was very exciting. And that's actually where I joined the DMZ, an accelerator program right in Toronto. You could almost think of it as the YC, the Y Combinator of Canada. Now, the funding isn't there in the same way, but really in the epicenter of Canadian technology, with a great network, an amazing community, and a lot of support for Canadian startups. Now, when I went, there was an imperative that if you joined the DMZ, you would actually come to Toronto and work out of the space there. And so that's what we did. Myself, the CTO at Speak AI, Vatzel, we moved to Toronto and got a great glimpse of the DMZ, of the Toronto tech community. And then a couple months in, COVID came, and I remember sitting in the office looking out, and there was like an ambulance and a guy in a hazmat suit and a person being loaded up into the ambulance. And I just remember thinking that maybe this time is coming to an end. And of course it was, with Toronto and Canada, really some of the longest lockdowns, and definitely coming to Toronto was not the outcome that I was hoping for. Now, a couple things. I met my wife, so I'm very happy I did it. I love where I live here now. And it's amazing to see the Toronto community, the Toronto tech community coming back together. So why Toronto Tech Week? One of the things that actually got me to Toronto in the first place was the experience of going to Collision, which was really a massive North American conference for technology with about 45,000 people going. I was young, I was naive, I was excited. And so with all the booths there, all the technology, all the stuff, I was just overwhelmed, overstimulated, and so excited. And I thought, hey, this is where the action is taking place. And I want to move to Toronto. I want to become part of this. Collision ran for many years in Toronto, and then last year it was moved to Vancouver, and I hope they had an amazing event. It became Web Summit Vancouver. I wasn't able to attend, but I know some people who did and had a good experience. But it was a huge loss for the city of Toronto, and so Toronto came and responded with Toronto Tech Week. And what was nice about this effort was it was very organic and put together by the tech community in Toronto, who felt like there was something missing with Collision no longer here. And there's a lot of amazing stuff happening here in the city, obviously in the country, and the need to want to highlight that. And I think that's been accelerated, especially with the recent geopolitical changes, most notably probably Trump coming in, tariffs, the question of Canadian sovereignty and if Canada should even exist. Really that creating a sense of Canadian unity, which I think is a good thing. And part of that is in the tech community, who said, hey, we're doing a lot of great things here in Toronto, in Canada, on a business scale. And then one of the bigger conversations throughout this week here has been that we're also exporting a lot of talent to the world. And what does that normal pipeline look like? A lot, it's going to the University of Waterloo and then right down to Silicon Valley. And so the topic of brain drain was also a big one here at Toronto Tech Week. Now, as of recording this, it's a Wednesday. The week is about halfway through. And so there's still a ton of events. If you're interested, Toronto Tech Week was really well organized on Luma. You can scroll through all the events here. You can see, are you attending? Is it near capacity? Are you on a wait list? And so I can click in. I can see the event. Nice little description, map, great notification system, including text, tickets right in the platform itself. And so shout out to Luma for doing an incredible job on Toronto Tech Week, organizing and centralizing all these events instead of them being just spread out everywhere. Now, as I pull up this and you look, what was interesting about this week is instead of it being centralized at one location like Collision was at the exhibition center, this was spread out all throughout the city. And so it is actually really creating a nice reason, an excuse to visit different places, travel throughout the city, see different company offices and spaces. And I think that's actually been a great part of the event. Now, there was a centralized sort of kickoff event called Homecoming. And you can see here that the energy was electric and that some of Canada's greatest builders were there. And you can see a couple pictures on the screen. So you've got Chamath. Chamath was Canadian. He's now an American, but obviously quite a reputation, perspective that he has. One of the core growth team members at Meta and then Social Capital, now the All In podcast. He had lots to say. He was very Chamath, talking about mice drowning and autistic Swedish girls. So great to see him. He's got those long fingers. That's the first time I've ever seen him in person. And I say that as a big fan of the All In podcast, although it's been a little back and forth here recently. But then you've got the real Canadian still. You've got Toby Lukey of Shopify with a huge presence at this event. They did an event later as well too with Chamath there. And then I think notably you've also got Cohere here as well too. So down in the right hand corner, Cohere, billion-dollar valuation company working on AI and has really great models and focused on sort of enterprise AI versus maybe more some of the aggressive AGI companies in the world today. And then you've also got Michael from Wealthsimple here, who did an incredible job during this presentation. Very relaxed person, at least it seems from the outside view. And I'm a huge fan of Wealthsimple. I'm a user and talked about going against these big businesses and banking infrastructures in Canada. Both of them basically talking about being Canadian companies. Cohere seems a little bit more out of choice. At least that's how Aiden is messaging it. And that narrative has been pretty strong throughout. Whereas the Wealthsimple CEO more said it was out of necessity because no one would give him any money. But it was interesting to hear that about an offer even to Cohere early from Americans and them rejecting that and trying to keep the headquarters here in Canada with all the technical talent and everything there. And then there was some really great speakers here. Raquel and Sanja, who I didn't really know that much about, but are running Wabi, which has done some incredible automated self-driving, and then Sanja leading the spatial computing division for NVIDIA here in Toronto. And so this event, they did a great job bringing the Toronto tech community together, highlighting a couple of the big stories in Toronto, in Canada, and really showing that there is an incredible talent and business acumen there, even if it's not always highlighted and so clear, and that a lot of that impact ends up being filtered down to US companies. And another example for me was going to Google's DeepMind session there, the AI gathering, and seeing how much the Toronto office has even contributed to that. So Imagen, one of the original image models that made a huge impact and has continued to spur along image generation, came from the Toronto lab and then dispersed across the world. But you don't think of that as something that is uniquely or fundamentally Canadian. And then you had Harley Finkelstein here at the Toronto Tech Week homecoming event. I followed him on Twitter, but I've never seen him really speak in person. Very energetic, enthusiastic, obviously a lot of love and advocacy for Shopify, but for Canada as a whole. And so I think they did a good job inspiring people with this event and then letting the rest of the week really go into a more independently organized flow with companies all across Toronto then hosting those events. And there's a picture of Harley the interesting statement here is around being more ambitious. And this was really, I think, one of the messages and tones set throughout the week is Canada needs to be more ambitious, maybe less humble, better at showcasing the impact that they're making. And it's interesting. I keep thinking of this example in my head. We've got OpenAI here, who really the goal is let's generate AGI. Let's get to artificial general intelligence. And then we've got Cohere, a wildly ambitious company from Canadian standards. And what they're saying is we're developing enterprise AI. And so even though they're wildly ambitious from Canadian standards, I guess one of the questions around is that moonshot, that even greater ambition that OpenAI has. And I'm seeing that now play out in sectors where you have these massively ambitious goals, these moonshot companies. And along the way, again, even if you don't achieve that ambitious final goal, you discover all these things along the way that are immensely valuable. And obviously we've seen that with OpenAI and ChatGPT and all of these things, and even seeing the DeepMind team talking about that. Whereas if you focus on maybe a less ambitious goal, and I'm not sure if enterprise AI fits into this, I'm just playing this out through this most ambitious narrative that's emerging. These things are super valuable to companies, but then there's going to be those shiny elements that come out of that AGI moonshot build out that is going to keep bringing people back to OpenAI and to these companies with even more ambitious goals. And so I think that's something that's been sticking out to me with Harley speaking about this. The DMZ that I had mentioned, their event with BetaKit was called Most Ambitious. And I probably can't see that too well. You can see it. Most Ambitious. Nice piece they put together about some of the companies doing incredible things here in Canada. Got a nice hat too, still got the tag on it. But I think it is good to question this idea of ambition, and even the fact that the discussion is happening is a valuable part of this event. And it makes you think, it makes me think, it makes me question my own ambition. What am I trying to achieve with Speak AI personally? What do I want to leave at the end of my life? How am I thinking about this through also the lens of my children, my love for Canada? I've chosen to stay here in Canada and I love this place very much. And it's obvious, while there's a lot of positive sentiment and great stuff happening in Canada, there's some objective signals that things aren't going so well. And what was interesting is in a lot of the conversations that I saw throughout this event, and especially at this homecoming event, really was talked about this risk being existential and this being almost a make it or break it moment for Canada. And I think that's important messaging to have. And obviously the world dynamics are changing very quick. The technological changes are happening very quickly. And even Chamath there talked about, hey, if you don't have technological dominance, then you don't have economic dominance and you don't have military dominance. And again, Canada has huddled under the shelter of the US for so long in that, but it's not necessarily, at least for a few years, seemingly the most viable option here right now. And we've got Mark Carney out there really more creating bonds with the European countries. And generally we've seen very limited innovation and technology there. And so while throughout the event, I think there was a limited discussion around politics and geopolitics. I barely even heard Trump and tariffs. I think maybe once during that session. I think there was an intentional effort to avoid those things. It is something that's obviously weighing on people's mind and is one of the accelerators, one of the catalysts for Toronto Tech Week in this event to even take place with such aggressiveness after Collision was moved. And it's obvious that Canadians face a lot of pressure, whether it's saying our whole country should be American or whether it's companies that should become American because of the resources, because of the capital, the consumer base of the US, the spending power. I think that tension is something that is going to continue to increase unless efforts like this are made to build that Canadian narrative, to rebuild that loyalty to the country, the passion for the country that I think has been eroding, but then was maybe re-sparked and reignited with some of Trump's comments here recently. Then you've got Tech 2, I used to call it Tech TO. They've rebranded the name. I know everyone's still grasping that. but organizing events. And so I got to go to a bunch of events and enjoyed, had some good conversations, met some good people. You can at these events just talk to someone and realize they're either doing something incredible or they've done something incredible. As just one example, just talking to this nice guy and found out he was the co-founder of FreshBooks, which is an amazing Canadian company, and he exited on that after 20 years, which was a huge success story in Canada. So those are the exciting parts about the events. I do think it's important that some of the things they've done here are more specific vertical or industry focused events versus these large generalized events where if you want to talk to people, you want to meet people, there's so many people there. It's hard to know who am I talking to, who should I be talking to? And of course, there's the more natural, general networking connection that you want to make. But it's obvious at events like this that people are investing a lot of their time. They're not doing other work or whatever. And so there's a trade-off for their time and the value. And so you want to be making connections that are worthwhile and meaningful and valuable and help you with personal life, with professional, with the business. And that's a pressure that I always acutely feel with events like this and the hustle and bustle that comes from it. And some of it can be great. Some of it can be very transactional. And there's obviously people who are very good at navigating those waters and other people who are not strong at it. And that's something I'm trying to figure out myself as I go through my own journey of networking, connection, and navigating events. I will say there's some people who are doing some really great stuff here in Canada that was highlighted at Toronto Tech Week. But also seems to be a lot of fake business. It's Tim Dillon's sort of fake business, or just at least companies very early stage or people very early stage, no revenue, just big ideas and just trying to find a way to navigate through that. And the other piece that I saw at least this year at Toronto Tech Week is so much focus on AI and so many things that are just looking the exact same. And a common conversation that I was having throughout some of the events is just the difficulty in, I would say, software-only businesses right now with the massive acceleration of development of things like Cursor and Windsurf, and then even deeper with Replit and Lovable, where you're prompting to generate things. And even if you're a great business who's worked a long time, the saturation, the oversaturation of new alternatives or competitors, or even just the messaging, the blurriness of it all, is definitely creating some problems across the sector. So great to get that temperature check, learn from people. I enjoy that very much and is one of the main benefits of events and times like this where people come together, they share, they connect, they network. The only other thing I would say, the critique I have is that when you go to these events, and it makes sense, these companies, they're hosting it in the space. Of course, they're going to sell a bit. They're going to do that. I think one is to understand the people who are coming. I saw some presentations yesterday, which I don't think fully respected that this was Toronto Tech Week and how technical a lot of the people in the crowd were. And so as demos were being done, I think there was some skepticism and negative feelings towards, hey, speak to us as if we already know this stuff, because it was obvious in the room that most people would. So I think that's one thing, is to know who's coming to your events. And if it's Toronto Tech Week, these are very tech-focused people. Maybe they're not even technical engineers themselves, but they're most likely pretty tapped into what's going on versus just a more general public. I think the other thing is that so many of these events where you come, you network for 20 minutes, then there's some panels and then a fireside, and then you network for 20 minutes. And I'd really like to see one, maybe less focus on the panels and the firesides, because today you can just watch videos on YouTube or you can use ChatGPT and then a lot of these things are being streamed and recorded. So if you're just sitting there watching, there is obviously the curiosity, there's the educational perspective of these events, but I do think there's a lot more valuable in the networking, in the connections after, in those conversations, especially if they're curated, if the right people are in the room. And so I'd love to see more time focused on social and networking. And even within that, I would say, hey, can you actually structure that even further, where maybe it's speed dating networking, where one person sits and you go around, and then you've even got a curated discussion or an ask and a give or something like that. I think there's a lot of value when you can do that versus, I see it, I experience myself. It's great. You get into these conversations and you learn and you enjoy, but a lot of them will never really turn into something more than that, maybe a LinkedIn connection And so it takes a lot of effort and sifting and focus to find those people that are actually going to continue supporting you and you continue supporting them, so that you're actually accomplishing things together versus that just LinkedIn connection and that one-time sort of conversation. It was hot. People bared through it. Definitely, I was sweating myself. I was looking at people who are sweating, people riding around on bikes. And I think, again, that's one of the great parts is when something like this happens, people are pumped to go to different events. They're hustling. They're going all around the city. And so a great way to connect with Toronto itself. The event's not over, so it won't come with any final summary. But I do appreciate everyone who put the time and effort into Toronto Tech Week here. It was obviously a lot of work. You could see it across all the events, especially that homecoming event. And I hope that people get connections from it. I hope they feel inspired. They feel excited. They walk away from the week feeling like there is power within Toronto. There is power within Canada, and that we can all take a little bit of inspiration away, a little bit of ambition away, and continue to improve both our personal and professional lives. And with that, improve Canada and help people remember why Canada is such a great country and place to be.